Okay, in this video we are going to introduce you to lighting inside of 3ds Max.
Awesome.
Now, there are several types of light available inside of 3ds Max. In fact, while I'm under the Create panel, let me jump over to Lights for just a moment. And you can see that right off the bat we have about 8 of them, but wait, there's more. We can come down to photometric lights, and here's 8 more that you can play with. For our purposes, we will really only be taking a look at 5 of these guys. These are the 5 that you really kind of must know. And if you really want to get technical, there's really only 3.
Yeah.
There are spotlights, direct lights,
and Omni
lights.
Yeah.
Now, let me just start off by creating an Omni light, because I think Omnis might be some of the easiest to understand. There's nothing really you need to know about their fundamental nature.
It's all
that difficult. So I'll create one here in the scene. Let's go ahead and expand my viewport. Let me right-click to end the tool. We'll drag this up into the air, and fabulous, isn't it?
What a beautiful scene you have there, Zach.
That's right.
That's amazing.
I have nothing to light right now.
So you could render this, and you could sell it like a Picasso.
I could. Let's hit G and hide out the grid. I'll jump over to Create, and let's create a simple scene. Let me drag out a plane. And here's an interesting thing. Yeah, notice the plane already has some light to it. If you don't believe me, let me kill out this light, and you can see there's flat colors. Now, I'll undo that, and I'll bring the light back in. Let me grab this plane, and we'll just change its size a little bit. We'll increase its length, increase its width, so everything's nice and big. Now let's go back to our Create panel and grab some spheres. I will switch on Base to Pivot, and let's just make an assortment of
multicolored
balls that we can light. So there we go. There's our super interesting scene, as you can see here.
That's awesome. It's like planets that are standing and talking to each other.
Exactly. Now, the first thing we need to talk about as far as lights are concerned is, again, your 3 main flavors that we're focusing on right now. That's Omni, Direct, and Spot. Right now, what I have in the scene is an Omni light. You can think of an Omni light as a floating light bulb.
Yeah, like a light bulb.
That's what Bill said a little bit earlier. This is a perfect light bulb, where if you hold a light bulb into the air, there's always that little steel screw area on the underside of it, and everything under the light bulb doesn't really get lit. This is actually a perfect sphere of light that will emit in all directions.
Yeah.
So there you go. In fact, it's technically emitting in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 directions. Up, down, left, right, forward, and back.
Sure.
So let's take a look at some of its parameters. Now, the parameters that we will see here for the OmniLight, we're going to see these parameters again later on. So if we see them again with a different kind of light, I won't be going over them a second time. I might just mention them. Let's go ahead and go under the Modify panel, and of course we can name a light if you want to. Changing its color, you can do that, but it's kind of irrelevant. I typically don't.
Yeah, that's just the color that exists in the viewport, not the color of the light coming out of it.
That's right. So again, naming lights is going to be important once you're creating more complex light rigs. For now, I won't worry about it. Now, the first rollout we have access to is our general parameters. So let's see, under this we have our light type. Now check this out. If I click down, we can change my type from Omni to Spot to Directional. The 3 types are available all right here. Next to this, we also have an on-off switch for our lights.
Literally like a light switch.
Absolutely. If I switch this off, boom, my scene goes dark. And it's scary because I'm
interesting
because the
default light in the viewport is no longer present once you put an actual light into your scene.
That's right. In fact, I can prove that. Let me go ahead and hit delete with that light selected. And here we go, back to the default light. Now, when we do a quick render, the default light is what gives us some sort of illumination. If it weren't for that default light, we would just get black.
Right.
So let me go back to Create. I'll create a new Omni light. Boom. I'll right-click my scene. We'll drag him up into the air.
That's cool.
And now if I render, boom, you can see we have light coming from a specific direction in the scene.
Sure.
If I go into my Modify panel and switch this off and re-render, boom.
Nothing.
There you go. Black on black on black. So we'll switch that back on. Now down from here we have the ability to switch on shadows. Now shadows are always very cool because right now if we take a look at our render, you'll notice that our objects almost appear to be floating. They have no shadows.
Right.
So while things look a tad more realistic than they do with default lighting, they still look really fake. So let's go ahead and just switch on shadows, a simple checkbox, re-render again, and boom. Everybody suddenly has shadows. Things are looking better by the moment.
Yeah.
Now, shadows come in many different flavors, if you will. We have several different ways that 3ds Max can calculate shadows. We have a shadow map, which is the default, and what this is going to do is basically create a texture that is calculated from the position of the light, and the texture will determine what objects catch shadows and what objects don't.
Right. It actually does a pre-rendering exercise before it actually draws out your scene, where it makes this map.
That's right. The drawback to this is really simple, and let me just go ahead and show it to you without trying to get too sidetracked. I'm going to go back to Create, Geometry, let's make a plane, and I'll drag this out. Now, yeah, it's in line with the floor right now, but that's okay. I'll lift it up, and we'll rotate it over. Now, if you'll bear with me for just a moment, I'll show you something that's really cool. Let's go over to the Material Editor. I'll create a material, and let's call this, just temporarily, Glass. And I'll take my opacity and I'll pull it way down, pretty much to nothing, and I will apply this to that object. So you can just barely make it out here inside my viewport.
Sure, it's very transparent.
Now, logic tells us that if an object is transparent, light will pass through it. You might get a really faint shadow on the floor, but practically nothing, really. However, if I hit render right now, take a look at this.
Get a big shadow. It's opaque.
Exactly. Our opacity is completely at 0. So we don't even see the plane, but we do see the shadow itself. Now, this can be handy. I've actually used this in a couple of different renders. If you need to add a shadow and to some random location, you can actually take a character and make him completely transparent, but he still leaves a shadow, which is kind of freaky.
That's awesome.
But the catch here is that the calculation taking place to make this shadow happen simply runs a beam, if you will, like a ray, straight out from the light and says, do I hit an object, yes or no? If you hit an object, make a shadow straight behind it.
Right, kind of like your light is shining a flashlight out into your scene.
That's right. So, and in this case, anytime it hits another object, it knows to make a shadow right behind it, whether that object is transparent, opaque, or whatever.
Right, it's not listening to the opacity parameter of your material.
That's right. Now let's come back over here to our light. Let's go back over to our shadows. The other type of shadow that we have access to is ray trace shadows. Now remember what we said about ray tracing. That is where the computer is going to calculate the path of your light rays.
Right, shooting out rays of light from your light source and then seeing where they bounce around in your scene.
That's right. Now the upshot to using ray trace shadows is that your ray of light will hit a surface and it'll stop for a second. Instead of just saying, I hit a surface, let's make a shadow, it starts asking questions. It hits the surface and goes, okay, I hit a surface. Well, let's see here. Is this surface transparent, yes or no? If so, how transparent is this surface? How much light is going to squeeze through? Is it refractive? Is it going to bend the light in different directions? If so, how much?
Right.
It's going to ask all of these questions. The cool thing about this is that now that I've accessed ray trace shadows, if I click render, boom, this guy no longer leaves a shadow while these guys do.
Very cool. Hey, can you bump up the opacity just a little bit? I'm curious.
I'm going to, absolutely. Let's go back to our material editor, and let's take our opacity, and we'll crank it up just a notch, and I'll do something else, too. I'm going to take my diffuse color, and let's make it something. So this thing is not only not completely transparent, but it's got some color to it as well.
Cool.
So let's go ahead now and re-render, and boom.
Oh, interesting. The shadow is not completely dark anymore.
That's right. The shadow, it's just starting to pick up a little bit of shadow, where over here we have these super black shadows.
I like that.
Now, that's really the only two types of shadow I'm going to focus on at the moment. Each type of shadow has its own parameter set. We're going to be using ray trace shadows in our scene. Let me just kind of show you the difference real quick. Since we got to shadows, I'll have to jump down a little bit, so bear with me.
Sure.
Under shadow maps, which is what I showed first, we have a bias. Now what this is going to do is this is going to push the shadows further away or closer toward our objects. So if I was to take this and just crank it, and let's just go ahead and do a quick re-render, our shadows are starting to move away, and in fact, they're starting to clip. You typically won't want to do this. This is a correctional force if your shadows just aren't showing up properly on a surface or they're not looking realistic. A really good example was I did a render not too long ago of a compact disc that was on a flat surface, and the shadows just didn't quite look right. It didn't look like a real object, so I had to take the shadows, use the bias, and kind of push the shadows away just a little bit. Except here, it's going to be kind of tricky for me to show you exactly what they're doing. Let me go ahead and I'll crank it up to about 2 or 3. And yeah, what we're doing is we're actually kind of scooting the shadow out from under the object. So again, just think of it as a correctional force, and we'll just kind of go on from there. We'll keep things relatively simple for the time being.
Sure.
We also have a size. Now, the first thing I told you guys about shadow maps earlier on in the video was that Max is going to create a texture that controls where your shadows are going to be placed.
It actually generates a physical map of your scene.
Now, this size controls the size of that texture. The higher this value, the more pixels that texture has. Typically, I like to keep this at exponential values of like 128. So like 128, 256, 512,
1024, 2048, 4096, 8192. Sorry, I'll stop.
We're all impressed. That's right. You have a sample range, and this is going to control a little bit of shadow fuzziness. If we go ahead and kind of crank that up, you'll notice my shadows start to kind of fuzz out just a little bit.
Oh yeah, very cool.
We have a couple of extra checkboxes that I'm not really going to dwell on too hard right now. We have absolute map bias, which is going to make sure that everybody's kind of sticking to the same amount of bias, and two-sided shadows to make sure that if we create shadows on the reverse side of an object, they'll still show up.
Sure. And one thing to keep in mind about size is that you will get a more accurate map if you bump up that size, but it does eat up more memory during render time.
That's right. And in a lot of cases, you don't really need a super high size. But the bigger your scene is, the more you'll find yourself probably needing to crank this up.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and close that down. I will come back up here. We'll go back to Ray Trace Shadows, and I'll open up the Ray Trace Shadow parameters. You still have a Ray Bias, which is going to do the same thing. It's going to scoot your shadows around. You have two-sided shadows. Again, if a shadow pops up on the underside of a surface, are you still going to see it? And you have a Max Quad Tree Depth, which is something I'm not going to go into right now. It's very technical about the number of bounces you're going to be able to access for shadows. Don't worry about that right now. Okay, so down from here, after we talk about shadows, we have probably the most important area of our light, and that is the intensity, color, and attenuation area.
Sure.
This is where you really can change what your light looks like.
Right, kind of like how bright is your light?
That's right. How bright is it? What kind of color does it have? Does it have any decay? And decay is something that's going to be very important to make your lights look realistic.
Sure.
We'll talk about that here in just a moment. So let's start off with what we see at the very top, which is our multiplier. Think of this as a dimmer switch for your light.
Right, the strength.
That's right. So by default, it's got a value of 1, which gives us the result that we see here. Booyah. So you can see, we have basically a normal bright light. As I take this value and bring it down, you can kind of see my scene out here starting to darken up. I could set it down to 0.5. We re-render, and the scene is much darker, because what we're doing is we're taking the overall value of the light's brightness and we are multiplying it by 0.5, basically chopping it in half.
Sure.
Now, you are not really limited here. You can go negative with this value. So if we render with a negative value, of course we get black.
Right.
And you can crank it up as high as you want. In fact, let's just push this. So there's 129.
Nuclear blasts.
Exactly. So a small atomic device was just detonated right over these guys. So watch out for that sort of thing.
Pretty crazy.
I typically leave this, at values around 1. Sometimes I'll pull it down just underneath 1 because I found that gives you more realistic results. Sometimes, depending on your decay, which I'll talk about again in just a few minutes, you may need to push this up beyond 1. So you have like 150% lighting in this case. So boom, we're starting to get really bright hot spots because we're really pushing our light. For now, let me set that back to 1. Now next to this we have our color swatch. This is where we control the color of our light. So if I need a bright blue light for any reason, there's blue, click close, and let's see, Shift Q, and there we go. So now everything is viewed under a blue light.
It's crazy. So if you're going for like a sunlight, maybe you could do like a pale yellow there or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like an outdoors kind of look.
That's right. Any kind of color you like. And again, it's usually nicer to keep these colors relatively subdued. But you can have a lot of fun here and get some nice natural lighting effects. Now, just a real quick thing, and this is only because I'm always impressed by the amazingly simple. Check this out. So here's a blue light. Let me go ahead and close our render button for just a minute. I'm going to take our object and let's hit, Shift, and we'll drag out a copy, and we'll just clone it, and then we'll drag out a third copy over here and clone that too. So right now, if I were to render it, we've got 3 bright blue lights, so things are starting to get really obnoxiously blue. But if I take this guy and let's make him red and hit close, and let's take this guy and make him green and hit close, we actually get combined white light.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So, reminds me of a center where I took a course once.
Yeah. But it's like that really cool RGB lighting. I know it's like it should be very obvious and everybody might be rolling their eyes right now, but to me it's just so awesome we can simulate that in the computer.
I like those shadows. That's pretty awesome.
So I'll go ahead and just delete these 2 guys out. We'll grab this guy and go back to his settings. We'll set him to probably something like a pale blue, something that's just kind of cool for now.
Sure. I get it. Blue.
Close.
Cool.
There you go. But cool colors. Now, underneath this, we have decay. Now, what this controls is how far your light will travel before its strength begins to diminish.
Right.
And in the real world, if you were to take a light, even the most powerful spotlight you can think of, and you point it at an object over a long distance, say 3 or 4 miles,
sure,
not as much light is going to hit that as if you were 2 inches from it.
Exactly.
That's just the way the real world works. So if you want your lights to look realistic, you want to give them some decay. By default, lights in 3ds Max have no decay.
Right, which means they just go on forever.
They go on forever. This light is just as strong right here as it would be if I moved it way out here. And I can actually prove that to you. Let me zoom back in here, and let's just take a quick render.
Yeah, it's still the same brightness.
Exactly. Ignore the positioning of the shadows. Just kind of take a look at the overall brightness of the scene. And I'll go ahead and close that. Let's zoom back out. Let's grab this guy and pull him back down here, kind of where he was working with earlier. I guess even further down, I suppose. And then we'll re-render. And here in the middle, because we do have kind of a circle of effect, we have just as much brightness as we had before.
Right.
The light is not starting to fade away over distance. Now, as soon as I open up my type for decay, we have 2 types of decay. We have no decay, inverse decay, which is kind of a medium level drop-off.
Right, that would be inverse, like 1 over the distance, so inverting the distance.
That's right. And then we have inverse square, which is taking that number and squaring it.
Right.
Inverse square is going to give you your most realistic form of light decay.
Right, that's the closest approximation of how light basically falls off in the real world.
That's right. Now, you will find as soon as you switch this on, your scene immediately becomes dimmer, and that is because...
Much dimmer.
Right, that is because your scene is taking a look at the size of things in max units. Like right now, if we take a look at our object, he's currently 80 units up in the air, so he's actually kind of far away. If I pull him down here a little bit closer, and we render, boom, there you go. Now, immediately the light looks a little bit more realistic because it's not, carrying on for infinity in all directions. Right, it's almost
like a real light bulb in your scene now.
That's right. Now, you can adjust the size of this. Now, you have kind of a start for that attenuation. I guess I shouldn't use attenuation just yet. You have a start for the decay.
Right. This is kind of like the envelope for where your decay actually begins.
That's right. Beyond, once you get beyond this sphere, decay is going to begin. The light will start to fade away. Within this sphere, the light stays full bright. So if I push this out like here, and we re-render, we have essentially the same thing that we had earlier everywhere we're in that sphere. And you can actually see the extent of that sphere if you look really close out here.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and set that back down to its default value, which I believe was about 40. So, boom, there you go. It's just a way to control that decay a little bit more cleanly. And you can click Show. Now, here's an interesting thing. This always confuses people the first time they see it. You click the Show checkbox and nothing really happens. What this means is, do you want to show this sphere of effect while the light is deselected? If we deselect, you still see this sphere of effect, where if I didn't have Show active, as soon as we deselect, that sphere goes away. So it's just kind of a way to visualize that at all times if you need to. For now, I'll go ahead and I'll leave decay off. And we'll talk about attenuation. Okay. Now, I want to mention this real quick before we go too much further. Guys, inside of Project 1, we probably won't be using a lot of these settings. But this is just kind of a basic introduction to lights, and it'll give you something to play with and help you kind of understand how lighting works. So I know right now I'm going over all of the groups and rollouts and checkboxes and all the inputs and spinners, but I won't be doing that as we continue on. I'm actually going to start pulling back. I just want to make sure I do cover the intensity color area.
Yeah, we just want to get you guys comfortable with what you see when you start creating lights in your scene.
That's right. Now, what we have here is near attenuation and far attenuation. Essentially, think of this as a way that you can create your own custom decay. First off, you check Use for this, and notice we immediately get a sphere of effect. You can control its start and its end. Now, in this case, its end is going to... as I pull this down, it's like pulling the whole sphere in. And we have a start, which is coming out from the inside of the sphere.
Right.
So as I keep spinning up, you can see it. So there's 2 of them. Now, what this is kind of a gradient that moves up. I know this can be a little bit confusing, but take a look at what we have here. This is the near attenuation. What we have is inside this little tiny dark sphere, we have no light. Then we have a gradient that is going to take us to full bright once we get outside this sphere.
Sure.
If I hit render right now, it looks like nothing all that interesting is actually happening. But let me take this light, and I'm going to push it down halfway through the floor, and let's render again. I'll just kind of rotate us up here above. See that black circle right there in the middle? It's actually kind of hard to see. Let me make everything a little bit bigger. So let's take our end, and we'll really crank that up, and we'll take our start, and we'll really crank that up as well. And now we'll render again. Ooh, we have a black hole in the middle of our scene. What's going on? It's so confusing. No, it's not that bad. inside our start sphere, now that's this sphere that I'm wiggling for you right now. Wah, wah, wah. Inside of this, we have no light.
Right.
Outside of the big sphere, the end sphere, we have full light.
Right.
In between the two, we have a gradient that is ramping upward.
So we have attenuation near our light source.
Right. We are starting attenuation. Now we have far attenuation as well. You switch this on, and you essentially get two more spheres.
Right.
So we got to kind of move out a little bit further. We have a start for this, which you can see here, and an end for this. So there's our start, little bright brown sphere, and then a dark brown sphere on the outside. This is the reverse of our near. This is going to ramp back down to blackness. So check this out. If you follow from the light on your way out, we have no light.
Right.
Then we hit our near attenuation start, and we start to ramp up.
Right.
So we get a gradient that gets brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter until we get to our near attenuation end. Then we're at full bright inside this region. Then we hit our far attenuation start, and we start to ramp back down. The gradient starts to decrease until we get to our far attenuation end, and then we have black again. So let's see, if I take my plane real quick, and let's just take its length and width, and I'll crank that up a little bit higher. If I hit render right now, we get this band of light.
Right.
Because inside here, we're within our near attenuation start. We're inside that initial sphere. Then we ramp up. You can actually see the gradient there, a little softening. Then we're full bright in this area. Then we ramp back down, so we gradient back to black, and then we have no light outside of here.
Very cool.
Now, the reason for this, why would I go through and tell you about all this? This is just a way for you to create your own levels of decay. You can literally make your own light decay like this, especially if all you're using is far attenuation, because inside this bright sphere, that's your full bright for your light. Outside of this, you have a gradient that goes further and further to black, 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 and then boom, you're completely dark once you get outside of here.
Sure.
So you can create your own levels of light decay. So that's really all there is to it. That's intensity, color, and attenuation. Let me go ahead and switch off this. Now, we do have two show checkboxes. These are exactly like the show checkbox for decay, where what they're going to do is designate whether or not you can see those attenuation spheres when the light is deselected. Typically, I leave those off.
Sure.
All right, so down underneath this, if we close up the intensity, color, and attenuation rollout, we have advanced effects, which I'm not really going to be going into right now. Oh, there was one thing I did fail to mention. I'll come back to it. I just remembered something. So I have advanced effects here. I'm not going to be going into this right now. This is where you can choose how much you're going to affect surfaces with your light. You can control the contrast of the light, whether or not you're emitting just diffuse color, whether or not you're just emitting a hot spot. Just a real quick thing, if you want to create a light that does nothing more than create a specular highlight, you can switch off diffuse and only emit specularity.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
And as I zoom in, you take a look at this, all we have is little tiny hot spots, which almost don't show up because we don't really have anything with a lot of...
right, you haven't bumped up the specularity on those objects.
It looks like... okay, I don't have anything showing. Let me switch off my near attenuation. We don't really need that. So, do another quick read. There you go. There's some hot spots starting to show up.
Sure.
They might be kind of faint on video, but rest assured, they are there. Let me go ahead and switch diffuse back on. Again, I'm not going to be getting too much into this rollout right now. We'll keep things a little bit simple. We have our basic shadow parameters. This is where you can control the color of your shadows, should you need to, for any reason. In most cases, you won't be messing with this, but if you need red shadows for some sort of effect, there you go. You have shadow density, which as you pull this down, the shadows actually start to fade away. So, we pull this down to about 0.2. Watch my shadows. Boom, they're almost gone now. So a great way to kind of soften up your shadows if you need to.
And these are the shadow map parameters.
That's right. Well, actually, we're still using ray trace shadows.
Yep,
these are just basic shadow parameters.
Sure.
These will be the same throughout, no matter what.
They're with both of them.
Right. So no matter what kind of shadow you're using, you're going to find these. You can map a particular image to your shadows if you want to. Again, something that you're probably not going to use that much, but it's there all the same. You can choose whether or not a light will affect shadow color. So if you've colored your light, you can make that affect the color of the shadow as well. And then finally you have atmosphere shadows, which since I'm not demonstrating this right now, but if you had like a fog in your scene, you could make shadows be passing through the fog. So kind of a cool thing there. Let me go ahead and close this up. And down from here, we have atmospheres and effects, not something I really want to hit right now, and mental ray indirect illumination, which is way beyond what I want to talk about. The last thing I did want to handle was something that I skipped over earlier, but I do want to make sure that I get to mention it.
Yeah, this is really cool stuff.
We have the ability to control whether a light will affect an object or not.
Yep.
This is very, very handy. We have a little exclude button here, which was up under general parameters. I skipped it earlier just because I overlooked it, so my apologies there.
Kind of like saving the best for last, though.
You could say that. So
it's sort of like we're breaking out of reality here because we actually tell a light, don't shine on this one object.
Well, that's right. It'd be like walking into a room, a pitch black room with a light bulb. And you turn on that light bulb and suddenly you can see everything in the room, and then going over to maybe the desk in the corner and saying, I don't want the light to hit that object.
Right.
And suddenly your desk turns black because light's not hitting it anymore. We can do that inside of 3ds Max, which is very, very cool. Now, first thing you're going to see here is two lists. You have a list of all of the objects in your scene. These are the guys that are all included by default.
Right.
When you create a light, everything is included for illumination by default. Now, you can choose whether you want to exclude or include. Now, if I take, let's see, I don't know my spheres apart right now, so let me grab, we'll just see which one I grab.
Because you didn't name them.
I didn't name them, but that's okay. There's a lot of them. So we'll grab sphere 2, and I'll just jump it over to the opposite side.
Right.
We'll click OK, and let me just go ahead and hit render. And this guy disappears.
Yeah, he has no light affecting him whatsoever.
Look at this. He's basically made a black hole in our scene. He's not receiving light, but he's also not leaving a shadow either.
Right.
Now, if I open this up, you can check this out. Under this list, we can choose whether or not we're excluding for shadow casting, illumination, or both. So if I just check illumination and click OK, look at this. So he's not being illuminated, but he's still casting a shadow.
Right.
I can switch it over to shadow casting, click OK and render, and now he's receiving illumination, but he's not sending out a shadow.
Right.
Or I can just leave both, which again is just going to punch a black hole in my scene. I can also essentially reverse this list by clicking include. So if I click OK here, look at this.
Basically just inverted it.
That's right. All we have in the scene is just this one object, so nothing else is really being included. So let's go ahead and open this up, and we'll switch over to exclude. Also notice this, the button changes its name. Currently says exclude. If I switch this to include and click OK, the button now says include. So you'll know your setting just by looking at the button.
That's pretty handy.
Now, that's about as far as I want to take this. We're going to leave it relatively simple. If you've named your objects, it's very easy to just grab them out of the list, send them over to the opposite side, and tell them, I don't want you to cast shadows, or I don't want you to be illuminated.
Right.
This is probably not something you're going to find yourself using a lot at first. As you get into more and more complex scenes, it'll make more and more sense for you to take a light and maybe make it so that it's not hitting a specific object.
Right. Let's say you want to create, an extra light in your scene just because you want to brighten up one specific object, but you don't want anything else to get brighter. You could take all of those objects and you could exclude them, or you could just take that one object and include it.
That's right. Reverse your list and just include that one object. So now you have a light that really only affects a single object in your scene, which is very handy. So let's see. From here, let me go ahead and move this guy out, and we'll close out this window. Render, and there's everybody. Now, with that, we have covered all of the parameters that I wanted to talk about for the Omni Light. So let me go ahead and switch my light type. Now, I can create a new light if I want to, and I will here in just a second, but for now, let me just switch things out. I'll switch over to a spotlight.
Cool. Now, it looks like a spotlight you see like in a stage.
That's right. Well, actually, it looks pretty much just like a cone, but I mean, you got to think a spotlight is going to really just create a cone of light. Now, let me take this guy. We'll slide him off to the side. Let's rotate him out toward our objects. You can see like that sphere and the little pink guy out here in the distance. He's actually catching a nice little disc of light there. And there's something interesting. Notice as I rotate across the spheres, first thing, before I even talk about parameters, notice how the spheres get this really nice light. It looks like the sun coming up,
Right.
But the plane looks terrible.
Right.
With this really chunky kind of lighting. That's because lighting in the viewport is based on vertex color. Based on vertices. The more vertices you have on an object, the cleaner the light will look. The fewer the vertices, the nastier it's going to look.
Right.
So in order for the lighting to look good here, we basically need more vertices. Let me go ahead and just grab. Now, I must have right-clicked and switched over to, some interesting stuff.
That's cool. You're actually looking through your Omni Light
which
right now.
I did not mean
to
do. Let's go back to our perspective for just a moment.
Sure.
And
that was a cool trick, though.
Yeah, well, I right-clicked and went set view to selected light,
awesome.
Which is just an accident to right-clicking in the quad menu. It is, however, a very handy tool to aim a light if you need to, if you just kind of need to see where the light's aiming. So, pardon me, that was a slip-up, but I will just kind of set things back to where they were. Let's go back to our views and go back to perspective, and I'll just rotate things around here and zoom back out. Now, what I was going to show was to take our length segments, and as I increase these...
Right. the light in the viewport itself starts to be hit the surface a lot more accurately.
That's right. We can set this up to maybe 60 by 60, and now we actually start to see the disk of light relatively clearly.
Sure.
Now, here's the thing. This won't affect your render at all.
No.
Check this out. If I hit render... But, hang on. I can't say it won't affect your render at all. It won't affect the quality of your render at all.
Right.
It will affect your render because having more vertices in your scene is going to slow your render down substantially.
Right.
So watch out for that.
Good point.
This is just for your viewport. So here's what it looks like with 60 segments, and here's what it looks like with one segment. The exact same image.
Sure.
But over here in the viewport, you lose all lighting.
Right.
So what I'll do is instead of 1, we'll put this at about, 30, just so we get a vague idea of where that spotlight is.
Okay.
Okay, now back to spotlighting. First thing we have, check it out, some of these general parameters, they look exactly like they did before.
Yep.
We have light type on, spotlight, of course that's, now we have a new option that has appeared. We have targeted. If I check this, we get a little tiny dummy object in our scene, omni1.target. I can move this around and watch what happens when I do.
Really handy. It's just telling where your light should point.
That's right. And you can take this, like you could link it to a character, and your spotlight will automatically track a character around.
That's fun. I've done that.
You can do all sorts of fun stuff with this. You can animate this in your scene, bouncing around, and it'll move your spotlight around.
And you could also aim your target, get that set up. Now go ahead and select your light and move that around.
That's right. So if I grab this, and then... So now we're always focused on that. So if you need to move them both at the same time, remember to hold down Control, grab them both simultaneously, and there you go.
Sure.
So, just wanted to mention that. Now, just one time, just kind of segue. I have put this on a path animation before and created security spotlights like that.
Oh, awesome.
And that looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, anyways, let's go back into lights, and I'll just grab my light. If you have the dummy object, the target selected, notice all your parameters are gone. You have to actually go back and select your light itself to get back to those parameters. So let me scroll back up. For now, I will switch off target. Now, notice that I have a little number here, and what this is doing is this is just controlling sort of the length of our cone.
Right.
It's just sort of a visual indicator, not anything we really need to sweat at the moment. It's just something to kind of help us out. All right, we have shadows, whether or not they're on or off. We have all of our different shadows. Again, all we focused on is shadow maps and ray trace shadows. We'll go ahead and leave things on ray trace for the time being. We still have the power to exclude. Our intensity, color, and attenuation attributes are all the same as they were. Nothing has changed here. So we can change the color of our light. We can multiply it to make it brighter or darker. We have a decay, which, again, is just going to make the light start to get less strong as we move away from it. So if I switch this on, things get a lot dimmer as we get out here. We also have near and far attenuation. Same as we had before, but it looks a little different, so I will just kind of show it to you real quick. If I switch on my near attenuation, instead of a sphere, we now have these lens-like, kind of like semi-sphere, kind of like a contact lens. And I can push out my start, and I can push out my end. Also, take a look at this. If I pull my end back so it's lower than the start, watch these numbers and watch the viewport. I know you can't watch it at the same time without crossing your eyes, but what I'm doing is I'm actually pushing the start back.
Right.
So I can push the end with the start, boom, like so. And again, what we have here is at the light, we have no light right now. Then once we hit the start for the attenuation, we start to have a gradient that gets brighter and brighter and brighter, and then we have full bright out beyond this. We can also switch on far attenuation. So in between these two disks, we now have full bright, and then we start to gradient down. So let me take my end and push it out a little bit further. So there's full bright in this segment, and then as we get out here, we start to gradient back down to black, and then no light once we get out here.
Very cool.
Quick thing on attenuation for spotlights. We have spotlight parameters. We have whether or not you want to show the cone. Well, we can already see the cone. What's the deal with that? Again, this is do you want to see the cone when the light is deselected. So if I deselect right now, notice no cone. If I switch on show cone, deselect the light, booyah, cone. Wonderful. So we'll switch that off. Next we have overshoot. And this is something that does confuse people from time to time. Pretty handy if you have a light in your scene that is supposed to be like a spotlight that's kind of bouncing light around a little bit. I don't use it that much. I'll usually use a combination of lights for the effect, but let me show you what it does before I talk any more about it. I'll start off by creating a plane. And right now, notice it's not receiving any light. I'm going to move it, not out into the distance. I'm going to move it up here behind my light. Let's just kind of position it, and I'll rotate it so it's kind of facing my light like so. And let me control this position just a little more.
Facing the back of your light.
Yeah, exactly. It's like right behind my light. Now, by default, is this guy going to get any illumination? Absolutely not.
Right.
He is outside the scope of our light. If I hit render right now, all we see is these guys, our little plane and our spheres, and there's a little transparent plane down there. Up here we have nothing.
And it makes sense because that cone in your spotlight is telling you where the light is actually going to be shining through.
That's exactly right. Only the things that fall within this cone will receive any illumination by default. As soon as I switch on overshoot, things change. Now, not really in the viewport. In fact, everything up here is going to stay pretty much the way it was, no matter how. And look, I have 30 by 30 segments. But now if I render, boom, you can suddenly see some sort of illumination on the plane back here. And the reason for this is that we are now basically telling the spotlight, hey, you're a spotlight, but we kind of want you to behave as if you were an Omni Light. Now, why is this kind of a problem? Well, it's not really depends. I mean, honestly, like I said, I don't use this that much. The trick is that overshoot does not cast shadows. So if I grab one of our little spheres here and we shift drag him up here, so I'll make a little copy. We got a lot of spheres in our scene now. And I'll put him, come back here, you, Control Z. There we go. I didn't want to deselect him just yet. We'll slide him right behind the light. So he's right in between the light and the plane. Now check this out. We'll think. Notice he's not casting shadows. These guys have shadows. Right. There's a shadow right there. This guy has no shadow. Overshoot light does not cast shadows. And all overshoot is the ability to create more light than just what's inside the cone. So, like, if you want to do this and you want to cast shadows, use two lights. You'll use a spotlight and an Omni Light in the exact same location.
Sure.
And that handles it the exact same way. Okay, so there's enough about overshoot. Let me take these two pieces of geometry, and they can go the way of the dodo. And we have a hotspot beam. What this is going to do is control what the brightest area of our spotlight beam is going to be in width. Or as far as, actually, it's an angle, like an overall angle coming out from the light. So if we set this to 45 degrees, you can see we now have a 45-degree light coming out, like so.
And this is a cool feature here, because this allows you to make your spotlight like not so razor sharp edged on your scene.
Absolutely right. These two attributes, hotspot and fall off, allow you to really control the look of your spotlight. Now,
soften it up.
Overall, what they're doing is just focusing your light.
Right.
So I mean, we can shrink our light down. If we take both of these and crank them way down, we get almost like a laser beam effect. And we can make them nice and bright. So if you need like a spotlight to kind of open up, you know, you could just, and there you go.
That's only because they're both the same angle right now.
That's right. Now check this out. If I zoom way in here to our plane and render, it's a pretty sharp spotlight.
Sure, it's pretty sharp.
It's not perfectly sharp because these numbers are a little bit different. I'm going to talk about what's going on here in just a second. If we take a real close look at the gizmo, the indicator for our cone, we notice two separate cones.
Right.
One is controlled by our hotspot. That's the area of full bright for our light. The other one is our fall off. Now, what's happening here is that if you kind of think of this as a radial type effect,
kind of attenuation.
We get exactly, but kind of in a different direction, where attenuation comes out from the light as if traveling in the direction of the light. This is sort of kind of like attenuation perpendicularly to it.
Sure.
So this is like full bright within this circle, and then no light outside the dark circle, and then get a little gradient in between. This is important to keep your lights from looking razor sharp. No spotlight in the world is going to have perfectly razor sharp edges.
Right.
I mean, I can set this guy over here to 47, and look, automatically the fall off is actually going to bounce up 2 units. It's just a way that 3ds Max keeps your lights from looking too razor sharp. But even this looks maybe just a little bit too sharp. So you can take your hotspot, your beam, and pull that in, and now when we render, notice we have this softening effect.
Ah, that looks a lot more realistic.
Where inside the hotspot we have full bright light. Outside the fall-off cone, we have no light whatsoever, and in between the two there's a nice gradient. And you can really get a lot of different effects with that. We can take the hotspot, pull it way down, and then you get this kind of really soft spherical type of light coming out of your spotlight. You can also change the shape of your spotlight. Let me pull my hotspot beam back out. We can switch this over to a rectangular light. I love this because this allows you to simulate light coming out of windows. Also notice that this guy here on the plane didn't update, but that's okay. We go ahead and click render, and now we have a squarish light. Let me bring my overall fall-off field down. Also check this out. Here's the fall-off. It's the outer cone. As I bring this down, notice how it pushes in the hotspot beam.
Right.
So it always maintains that offset between the two. So
right, because you could never have your fall-off smaller than your hotspot. That just wouldn't make sense.
That's right. Now, the cool thing about this is it can be used to create the effect of light coming in from windows in a really cool kind of way, or coming in from a door, all sorts of things. You can also adjust the aspect. So you can create aspect ratios, and you can do a 16 by 9 if you want. You can also fit that to a bitmap, where if you click this, you're going to get an open window where you can open up a particular bitmap, and you'll use the aspect of a particular image. Now, that's something I don't really want to dwell on too much. Right now, we'll just focus on adjusting aspects manually. So let me set this back to circle. And from here, all of our attributes, our parameters, if you will, pretty much stay the same. We have our shadow parameters, which is exactly what we've already seen.
Yep.
We have ray trace shadow parameters, which we've already talked about, atmospheres and effects, and so forth. So that takes me back up to general parameters again, where we take our light type and now switch it to our final type of light, which is directional. Now, a directional light can be thought of as an infinite plane of light that is being calculated from infinitely far away.
Right.
It is light that travels parallel to itself. Now, when you are looking at a spotlight or an Omni Light, you have light that's radiating from a central point. Like if we move to a spotlight, you can say that the light is starting from this point, and this in this direction is moving kind of down towards here. Up here it's kind of moving out from here, but it's all radiating, going out in different directions from this one point. A directional light's a little bit different. All of the light is traveling in the exact same direction. Now, why is this useful? This is great for simulating lighting sources that are very, very, very far away, things like the sun. Because when you look out, like in a parking lot, at a bunch of street lights that are lit in sunlight, all of the shadows are parallel, because the sun is so far away that you don't get any divergence in the shadows. So, in this case, we're going to get the exact same effect. We'll end up with shadows that are all pointing the exact same direction. So if I come over here and let me move my viewport up, let's hit render. Boom, check this out. We have a little bit of circle, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. Let me go down to my directional parameters, and we have our little hotspot set in here. So let me, just for the time being, I'll just lift that up. And we'll, boom. There we go. So we have this light. Notice all of the shadows are all pointing the exact same direction.
Right.
They're not all fanning out the way they were earlier. So now let's go take a quick glance at our parameters. Of course, general parameters, again, all the same. Intensity, color, attenuation, all the same. We still get that near and far attenuation we can play with. Under directional parameters, things change just a little bit, but stay very much like a spotlight. We have a cone, which is what you see here, and if we show this, it's just whether or not you see it when the light is deselected. We'll switch that off. We have overshoot, which will put light up here behind this, so no big deal there. We have our hotspot beam, which if I pull this in, you'll notice if I render, again, we just have a softening effect.
Sure.
It's just the big difference here is that instead of light radiating from a single point, we have light that is all traveling parallel, like a laser, if you will.
Sure, that makes sense.
So let's see. Let's go ahead and grab our fall-off field. We'll pull that back. Actually, let's just pull our hotspot beam way out. And we can switch this to a rectangle or to a circle. We can adjust the aspect just like we did with spotlights. And here we end up with the effect of sunlight.
Yeah.
Because I've just made this nice and big.
And again, all shadows are pointing the same exact direction.
Right, exactly as if the sun were up overhead. So, really, I think that's it. I mean, we go back down to advanced effects. They're all the same. And shadow parameters, they're all the same. Ray trace parameters, we've already talked about that. So
right, because we are using ray trace shadows. We see ray trace shadow parameters.
That's right. So that is the whole kit and caboodle, all of the lights we're going to talk about. Now, there's one more thing that we haven't yet covered. Let me delete that light. I'll go back to create, go back to lights. And I said that we were going to talk about spots, directs, and omnis, which we have. But notice we have two different types of spot and direct. We have target and we have free.
Right.
Now, we were essentially creating free lights a second ago. You guys saw targeted for just a moment, but let me show you how this works. I'll go ahead and go back to a 4 view. We'll come in here to the front view, and I'll click on free spot first. And if I click, we just get a light that is pointed in the direction of the viewport.
Right.
And it's got a huge cone right now. So let me go ahead and undo that. We'll come over here to perspective, and now it's pointed down at the ground. And I can come down here to my parameters, go to spotlight effects, and I'll pull that cone way, way, way down. And we'll pull this way, way, way down, too, because that's just crazy. So a free spotlight is just going to automatically point in one direction. If we want it to change directions, we have to physically go in and rotate it.
Right.
Now, earlier you guys saw that I can take a spotlight and switch on the targeted box. And while I didn't say this, you can do that with direct lights as well.
Sure.
They also have that target checkbox, and you can switch on something like a little dummy that you can move around. The light will always aim at that object.
Right, and all the Create panel is doing is it's allowing you to create that target light by default
from
instead
the
of turning it on after you create it.
The only thing it changes is I make a quick user view just to spite everybody.
Shift Z, there you go.
That's right. We can grab a target spot, and now creating lights is a little different. Instead of a single click process, it's now a click and drag, and you drag that target out wherever you want the light to be. So that's all there is to it. That is tons of lighting information on all the different lights. Again, these are the 3 we're going to be using primarily throughout most of this class. And that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.